Thank you. Sorry, over to you, Gavin.
Yeah,
I shall now mute myself.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jerry. As you'll see, that this is intended to be a joint presentation between myself, Jerry, and Bill Batchelor. Jerry and Bill having provided some materials, so that's been integrated into the evening. But if anybody feels so inclined and has any material handy, then if we've got time, then I hope we'll be able to come to it. It's a relatively small group, so I think, as Jerry said, that we can take questions and comments as we go along. And I always find from these evenings that there's a lot to be learnt, even as the presenter. And as an enthusiastic amateur, I'm sure there's quite a bit that I don't know, and it'll be great to just share knowledge and experiences. So if we go on, I'd just like to say that Dave Watt also has been in touch. He's not on the meeting tonight, and he provided quite a useful note, which I'm going to draw on a couple of points in the talk that I'm going to give. And Dave Watt, quite interestingly, was at university, and his lecturer at university knew personally Edward Imhoff, who we will talk about quite a bit this evening. So it just goes to show, when you get asked the questions, how many handshakes between you and the American president, that actually, so far as mapping is concerned, there's a very short link there between Dave and his tutor, and somebody who has got high regard and repute in Swiss mapping. So we'll come to that. And the last point I just wanted to mention was that in a talk recently by Richard Oliver, he showed an image of a Swiss map, which was there only briefly to make a point, but I noticed on it something that was quite significant. And that really triggered a thought and a question to Jerry that we could have a chat on this. Okay. I heard somebody talking then. I don't know if that's right. I just thought I'd take a couple of minutes, no more than that really, to sort of set the scene. And Jerry was teasing me beforehand about the Toblerone. Well, there we are, you see. It's my sort of amateur attempt to line up the Toblerone logo with the Matterhorn. And on the left there are just a few of the sort of, I suppose, what you might call the traditional symbols of Switzerland. And they're the ones that you probably come across quite frequently, along with cuckoo clocks, items like that. But for me, most interestingly, ever since I've been visiting Switzerland, have been their maps, and the maps produced by the Swiss government. And that's really the focus of the talk this evening. Switzerland's had a federal structure since 1848 and has now got 26 cantons. The latest one, I think, was Jura in the 1970s when they separated from Bern, and that caused a production, actually, which I haven't commented on later, but specific maps were brought out very quickly to show the new boundaries of the new canton. I think they take great pride on these matters and dealt with it very expeditiously. Cartography, I've said here, is a joint matter, and that's because for some considerable time it's been a responsibility at a federal level, but also at a cantonal level. But it's only been formalized really since 1902. And when we talk about the history a little bit later on, we'll talk about that again. And as a country, it's 135 miles north to south and 220 miles east to west. And within that relatively short space, in comparison even with the UK, it doesn't half pack in quite a lot of interesting features, as we'll see, as you probably know. The population's about 8.5 million, so broadly, I think, the size of London. And as Jerry's mentioned, there are 4 official languages, and we will touch on some representations of those in the maps as we go along. So that's a little bit of the background. This is just really sort of my thoughts and from my experience that across the whole of Switzerland, there seems to be a really strong appetite and culture towards cartography. So there's federal mapping, there's cantonal mapping, there's shed loads of tourist mapping. Wherever you go, you can purchase it at railway stations and bookshops and the like. And we'll come to that as an example in a moment. There are also school maps that are produced by the cantons themselves, and there are national atlases. So there's a highly structured appetite for mapping. and I think pretty high awareness amongst the population for it. And quite interestingly, and we'll touch on this, and Bill, I think, will come to this with his part towards the end, there has been over the last century the development of what's termed the Swiss style, using relief tinting, and we'll see some examples of that. And for those of us used to the UK and our reluctance to tint things, it's quite a pleasure to see the results that can come out of it. And Bill's got some particularly attractive images that demonstrate that. So this is a country which has got a strong appetite for mapping, and one of the areas where it's very prevalent is what I've termed here the tourism. The point I want to make here really is that there are a number of firms that over the years have used the federal mapping as a data source, but have prepared customized maps. Two examples shown here for railway companies in Switzerland, and arrows indicating extracts from the maps produced. The companies concerned, Kummerly & Frey and Aurélie Fouisly, are the prime leaders, but there are others around. And the examples here are by Kummerly & Frey. The map at the bottom, the one for the Furka-Oberalp Railway, is interesting because this was the thought that Richard Oliver's chap prompted, which it shows the railway lines by red colour. At the time, 1926, a recently opened railway line, and they immediately produced this map. You'll see towards the top of the extract, there's a reference to the date when the map was licensed by the Federal Land Office in 1926. And that red line was the connection with the image that Richard showed, and it made me go back to my collection and start digging through to see why and where that was used as a colour. And the importance of that will become evident later on when we talk about the new edition of the national map. So there's a lot of work or a lot of maps to be seen on the tourism side. Complementing that in many ways are the school maps. The example here is the school map for Zurich canton. And you'll notice in this somewhat battered copy that the editor of the map is Professor Eduard Imhoff. And on the right-hand side is an example of the map. When I prepared this, I realized, of course, I'd actually photographed a section that's not in Zurich canton. This is in Lucerne canton, but nevertheless, it's on that sheet. But you'll see there that there's a use of layer tinting and shading to give a 3D effect, and it makes a very credible attempt at that, considering it's printed on a flat sheet. Cantons produce each of these maps for use in their schools, and in addition to that, there is a atlas, a high school atlas. And Professor Imhoff, who was based at Polytechnic or University in Zurich, was instrumental and editor of many of these publications for a considerable period of time. He was very influential in terms of the debate, which we'll talk about in a little while, about setting up the standards for the new national map. And he was a professor in Zurich for some 40 odd years before retiring. He passed away in 1986, so some little while ago now. But his influence on the development of Swiss mapping and the Swiss style was very, very significant. And in fact, one of the points that was made in the note from Dave was that his lecture regarded Professor Imhoff as something of a god because of his status in Switzerland in terms of cartographic development. And I think probably some of the things that Bill will talk about later on will just show how much work he'd put into it and the quality of what he did and the impact that it had. I suppose because it's a country blessed with very significant mountain ranges, that being able to represent them in such an attractive way to give an impression of the relief is essential. And certainly from my perspective, they're a treat to the eye to look at. But we'll come back to relief tinting a little bit later on when we talk about the national map. So moving on to federal topography then. So this is mapping across the whole of the country that the state effectively sponsors. Prior to 1902, it had been under military control, I suppose, perhaps mirroring the way that the Ordnance Survey developed in this country. But since 1902, it had been set up in a formal department. And that department took over the work that had begun under Dufour and Siegfried. I think there's a typo there. It should be F-R-I-E-D. So it took over the work from Dufour and Siegfried and ultimately produced the national map. So if I perhaps go on to have a look very briefly at the first two, because I wanted to concentrate on the national map. Here's an example of the Dufour map. This was a version that was printed in 1933. The original survey work was undertaken between 1844 and 1864. And the maps were produced at a scale of 1 to 100,000, covering the whole of Switzerland in 25 sheets. And this was the first time that a uniform map of the country had been produced. The country was going through a period of turmoil at that time, with religious wars happening between the Protestants and the Catholics. And it was only towards the end of the period when the survey work was completed that real stability. Actually, sorry, no, it was at the start, or pretty much towards the start of the survey work being undertaken, that stability after the last war occurred, and the need and desire for a national map really supported, if you like, the concept of Switzerland as we know it today. So this is the Dufour map, which, as you can see there, has got hachering and oblique light shading in the mountainous areas. This particular version has been overprinted with a grid. The purpose of the grid, I'm afraid I don't really know. But it does make for a very dark map in terms of the images of the hills, at least. And then with the application of the grid, it makes it quite challenging to find to use. You'll notice at the bottom there's a reference to the rocks in Lake Geneva, the Pierre du Niton, which is the Swiss equivalent of the Ordnance Survey measuring station at Newlyn in Cornwall. So all heights in the country are based on that level in Lake Geneva, the west end of Lake Geneva. And that has been a consistent starting point ever since, although I do believe now that GPS and other methods of height measurement are used. So this was a map produced in what we would call mid-Victorian times, but actually remained in use until the 1960s, when a new 1 to 100,000 map was produced.
Yeah, before we move on,
yeah,
the red numbers 134, 136, 137.
Yeah.
Any idea what they are?
I've got the map here. I'll be quite frank. I tell you what I shall do. While we have somebody else doing the presentation, I'll see if I can identify that.
Yeah, and the other curiosity are the red crosses. There's one
next to the 136 and 137, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is possible, and I'll double check it. It may well be some index to a later, more detailed sheet. But I tell you what, if you leave that question with me, I'll see if I can find the answer to it.
A quick observation, there are two more red crosses right down on the bottom of margin, almost as though they form a graticule of some sort, but it's not a Latin long. Oh, is it? No, it's not a Latin long graticule.
No.
Which
red numbers are not central to, if you can see, if you could make a block, if you like, between the two on the baseline, project up to the two crosses. 137 is not central in the sense that it's an index number to that block. So it's I'll have a look at the map and see whether it offers any more clues.
I was just wondering if the Swiss, which graticule the Swiss used. Did they start at Greenwich, or did they change at all?
Dufour created his own start point and generated a grid based on that, a grid which is still used today. It does not tie back specifically to Greenwich. Again, it's one that's just relevant to the country in its particular shape. So the Dufour map, this is a 1 to 100,000 scale, but it is very much the starting point, and it had quite a long life. Only superseded in the early 1960s when a new 1 to 100,000 map of the country was completed. If I may go on, the next series of maps was the Siegfried map, here spelt correctly. And publication of this map started in 1870. Hermann Siegfried was the officer in charge of it. It was produced in 3 colors, brown, black, and blue. Relief shading was added in 1887. And the whole work was only completed in 1926. Printing stopped in 1952, and the map was finally superseded in 1963. So again, a important staging point in terms of mapping development, but also one that had an incredibly long life before it was completely superseded. Quite an attractive map in its own right, and a very different proposition to the one that preceded it, the Dufour map. So if we go on then towards the national map, and here we start to see the influence of Professor Imhoff again, who'd only in the early 1920s taken up a professorship at Polytechnic University in Zurich. But there was a great national debate around about 1927 about what to do to replace the Siegfried map, which was now becoming quite out of date because the original surveys were considerably earlier. There was some updating, but people were looking for a fresh start, if you like. And Imhoff played a significant role in leading the argument for various scales of maps to be produced. And the production of the maps and the commissioning of the work was contained in an act that was passed on the 21st of June, 1936. The scales were set, including the provision of the 1 to 50,000, which is the sheets that we're going to talk about. And in fact, until the recent new national map, in the bottom right-hand corner, there was always a reference to this act that set up the production of the national map. That reference has now been removed, along with 1 or 2 other bits and pieces, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Because of the political situation then in Europe and Switzerland, perhaps feeling more keenly than any other country, the fact that it was surrounded by Germany, Austria, and Italy, they set about prioritizing a production of the 1 to 50,000 maps. The first sheet was produced in 1936 for Wildstrubel. And that production, sorry, I meant 1938, and that production in 1938 coincided with the 100 years anniversary, so it was quite a nice tie in there. And we'll have a look at that specific map and an example from it in a moment. Just a note here, though, that the public sales of maps were suspended between 1939 and 1945 for the duration of the Second World War. So the general population, if you like, could not purchase maps for that period. Maps during that period were produced for military purposes, but I haven't seen an example of those, and I don't know whether they are or how similar they are to the versions that were produced for public consumption. So this is an extract from the first map that was produced. You might want to enlarge your screen if that's practical for you, just to be able to see some of the detail. One of the most noticeable changes here was the introduction of a green tint for forests. So this was produced in 4 colors. Certain versions of the map, because there were no forests, were produced in 3 colors.
Gavin, may I, it's Jerry, can I just
Sure.
interrupt a minute to say to people two things. First of all, you mentioned expanding your screen. I don't know if everyone's aware of it. If you go to view options at the top of your screen, you get a pull down menu. And if you then select zoom ratio, you can multiply the size of your screen in detail, so you can actually zoom in on a map without affecting everyone else. The other thing, Gavin, is I've had 2 chat messages from one which is a mystery number. I suspect that's you, Peter, isn't it? Is it Peter Barber who's there? I can see him smiling. Yes, it is. Peter, are you in Switzerland? I've muted everyone. I'm sorry, you'll have to unmute.
I am.
Welcome. Peter asks or states that the particular edition of the Dufour map must date from after 1890 because it shows the Ile de Saint-Pierre not as an island, which it was until 1888. So he wonders, is this the Siegfried Map? You're off mic. I couldn't make that out. Could anyone else?
No, I'm afraid I couldn't. Well, perhaps shall we come back to that specific map, because
yes,
the question was asked about the grid, so we'll have a look at that. The cart is the map is marked Dufour cart, but let's have a look at it and see if we can find out a bit more, and Peter might be able to help us with that.
Yes. David Andrews asks that 604 sheets at 50,000 scale is for such a small country seems excessive. How large are the sheets?
I think actually that's possibly the figure for the 1 to 25,000 sheets. But the sheet sizes are relatively small, and that was one of the significant changes with the national map, was that the sheet sizes covering an area of 24 kilometers by 35 kilometers was much bigger than the previous series. So this map that we're looking at now, this is an extract from the first map produced. I must point out at the start that there is no relief tinting or shading on this map, and that is because they produced them in not only different sizes, so this is a double sheet, they also produced, they would term a half sheet, but they produced it with tinting and without tinting. There was any number of variations, it seems, and it was only in the 1950s that simplification in terms of the sheets that were produced seemed to occur. Another feature of this particular sheet and the ones produced until 1951 was an inclusion of the legend on the right-hand side. After that date, I think, as Jerry will talk about a little bit later on, the legend was contained in a conventional signs leaflet. And that, of course, with the reduction of the paper, meant that the folded size of the map reduced slightly. So this was quite a significant change. As we've mentioned, the amount of land covered on the map itself, very much different to the previous Siegfried map. And this set the standard, if you like, for the work that was then going to continue until around about 2015, 2016, when the new national map started to be produced. Moving on to the covers, this was the cover of the map when it first came out, very plain green cover. And on the back, printed onto the rear of the map itself, was the map grid itself. And that grid is still in use today on the national maps that are produced. On the particular copy I've got, you'll notice there in pencil, it says that this was obviously a map enthusiast, who I also think was a mountaineering enthusiast, in judging by some of the other annotations, noted the fact that this was his first purchase of the new national map, along with a couple of other sheets, which was quite nice. And then on some further sheets, which he bought in 1945, he noted that these were the first purchases after the Second World War. A sort of detail that I quite like. And I've got quite a few maps in my collection, and I don't know whether it's a characteristic of Switzerland, and I say that because I never write on my maps, but they're very fond of putting their name and the date of purchase of the map on, which gives actually a very strong personal element to the collection, and it's quite good fun. And I would actually quite like to find a way to see if you can find out who some of these people are, because I'm just intrigued, because they've built up, you know, quite significant collections over the years, which I was lucky to purchase. So that's the index for Wildstrubel. If we just talk a little bit about the relief tint, because on the left-hand side there is an example from the sheet for Interlaken, produced in 1939, of the first tint that was added. This is a brown tint, and this is in the shadow of the light source. The light source was set at in the northwest, and as you can see, coming from the top left-hand corner, it places the side of the mountains down towards the lake in shadow, and that's a uniform brown tint. You'll also notice that the lake itself is shown by blue color, but with some blue hatching across it. By 1954, a decision had been made to update this. You'll see that the lake is now solid blue, although it do show some contour lines. But the tinting itself has changed to a new mix of grey and yellow. Grey being reserved for the side that's in the shadow, but yellow applied on the side that's in the light. I suppose there's a logic to that, if that's where the sunlight or the source is. But also a much more subtle application, because you'll notice against some of the valleys on the shadow side that there are hints of sunlight, which obviously managed to creep over the line of the mountains at this 45-degree angle. So again, adding much more depth, and in my view, quite an attractive and important change to the look of the map. It's a much more friendly color. If you looked at the map on the left, the brown actually comes across as quite a solid color. It's considerably enlarged in this extract. But that's how the relief tint developed. Another issue which had to be dealt with was the question of international boundaries. And this is an extract from the map just east of the Matterhorn and Zermatt, with the boundary with Switzerland. And you'll see here that the Swiss part of the map is based on Swiss materials, which they had resurveyed and drawn to the new specification. But then up to a point, and you'll see there is actually a gap, a white gap of possibly, you might call it no man's land, before they revert to the Siegfried version. And it was only at a much later date that the Italian part was redrawn to the then current Swiss standard. So I think this was probably regarded as a quick fix, if you like, to allow the map to be published. And I just drawn attention there at the bottom to the Dufour-Spitze, which is a mountain that was renamed in honor of the first cartographer who mapped Switzerland. And before that, it was called the highest point, and now it's called the Dufour-Spitze. So it's quite a nice gesture towards the memory of the work that he undertook. Some of the developments up to 2015. So we've talked a little bit about the relief tinting and how that changed from brown to yellow, yellow and grey, and a change of the sheet size. Some of the other maps that were offered, the half sheets and the 3 coloured editions, were withdrawn in 1953, and a certain amount of simplification occurred to the map lettering, which, if you've noticed, is in almost a script style. The last sheet was produced in 1963 for Domodossola, and that replaced the Siegfried map. As we mentioned earlier, the Dufour map was eventually superseded in 1964. In 1968, a 6-year revision cycle was introduced, and that continued until the advent of the digital database. We'll talk about that in a moment under the new national map. And in 1994, further colours were added, particularly for the roads, showing in red and yellow for the different status of roads. So there was relatively little development apart from some specification changes in the early 1950s. And Dave Watt's note does make the comment that because Eduard Imhoff, who was again highly influential on matters concerning cartography, because he was still around, there was a high degree of reluctance to interfere with the specification of the mapping that he had taken such a high role in preparing. So far as the covers are concerned, here's a selection here of the way that the covers are developed from 1952. So this was when the covers or the folded map slightly reduced its size. In 1975, the map there numbered 2 was produced with a green banner across the top, and then 2 more recent variants. And the 2014 version is the one that is still in use today if you purchase paper maps. So if we go on to the new national map, I think this was probably regarded as the first major change since 1935, and driven very much, I think, by the desire of the federal government to not only have perhaps a cheaper mapping service, but one that was able to keep up to date much more quickly with any changes that were going on, and to therefore be quite flexible in the process. And Dave's note alludes to this in quite some detail, that there were, if you like, political desires to see improvements. And that led to a period of around about 8 years where Swiss Topo and and others worked to prepare a new specification to create a new database. And apparently through that process undertook considerable consultation with the public on what they were doing. Although Dave does note that quite a bit of that consultation was with ex-employees of Swiss Topo, so I don't quite know how they got over the ingrained position that people tend to pick up when they're at work, and any change is a bad thing. But nevertheless, they have actually made a very significant change to the map. And they started from the point of view that even though the map was very well known worldwide, they were quite prepared to make a fresh start. They didn't sort of purchase something off the shelf. They didn't only tinker and change half of it. They actually addressed the whole mapping database and what it produces in a very significant and far-reaching way. To the extent that they're now able to produce, but only digitally, a 1 to 10,000 map, which was not one of the scales approved by the 1935 Act. So they've been able to expand the range of maps. And if you do get the chance to look at it online or on your mobile even, it's actually quite an impressive product to see. But to get back to the national map, the first sheet was issued in 2016, and the last sheet had been issued in, I think it's 2020 or 2021. I'm not entirely sure there. I got a little bit out of touch with the events of the last year, but the last sheet has now been issued. And there were some specific changes. There were numerous other minor changes, but there were some specific changes. The second one I've just noted there, the depiction of the railway network and stations in colour, a red colour, was for me as a railway enthusiast one of the most significant changes. And of course it drew me back to that reference that Richard made from the tourist maps and the example I showed earlier from the Furka Oberalp, where they a long time ago, almost 100 years ago, were using red as the colour to show railway lines. So I thought that was quite an interesting choice. Whether it was informed by the previous use or not, I don't know, but I quite like the historical link. One of the other most significant changes is the font that is used on the face of the map, and this is the Frutige Font, which is a font designed by a Swiss man, and that has replaced the script font. So perhaps let's have a quick look at this is an example of the new map, and there you can see very clearly the railway lines shown in red. At this particular pace at Burgun, you'll notice the almost spaghetti-like contortions of the railway as it climbs up the hill to the Obula Pass. And the other significant features, I would say, are the application of the new typeface with some use of italics in bold and italics in non-bold. There's quite a mix going on. But again, this is all coded in the map legends to explain why particular typefaces and sizes and weights are used to provide you with information. So this is the new version, and here, just for comparison, is the 1951 version of the same area. And 1951, this map was produced still with a grey tint at that stage, so there would have been an intermediate version where the yellow, sorry, this is showing the brown tint. There would have been an intermediate version where the yellow and grey tint was used. But a pretty different look on the face of the map. Simplification, perhaps, of the way that forests are shown. There are no trees in the green. And when I first saw the new map, I thought, oh my goodness, I really liked the old map. But actually, I now got quite used to the new map and I'm quite fond of it. Just goes to show how you can change, doesn't it? So this is how the map has evolved, really, from going back to the 1938 version of Wildstrubel, right the way through to the latest version. I thought perhaps I'd close with just 1 or 2 comments on some of the more distinctive features that you can pick up on the maps. We're going to talk a little bit about glaciers later on. I think Jerry is going to cover those. They obviously are a feature that we don't have in this country, so it's quite interesting to see how they're tackled. But I thought there are perhaps 4 areas it might be worthwhile just spending a moment or 2 on. First of all, rock slides, and here's an example, somewhat of a dramatic rock slide that occurred in the Matterhorn in 1991, where a rock slide actually severed the railway line, the river, the roads, and as well as destroying properties. Nobody was actually killed in the process, which is quite fortunate. Nevertheless, it took a little while to ensure that the flooding in particular of the village was dealt with. But from a mapping perspective, this is how it was shown. I'm not able to use my cursor when we're sharing in screen format, so I hope you can see, if you're able to identify in the center of the map on the right where it says Großgufer, you'll see the gray shaded area fanning out into the base of the valley. If you look across to the earlier map, the 1988 version, you'll see again Großgufer, no fanning out into the base of the valley, and you'll see on the other side towards the railway line a little settlement and some field huts. You'll see the railway line and the road, and you can therefore see the comparison between 88 and 95 in terms of what the rock slide did to that part of the valley. That's quite interesting to see it mapped in such a way and in such detail. The next one to talk about is the Rüsti Graben. Rüsti, as you probably know, is a sort of Swiss potato pancake, much favoured, I gather. Perhaps Peter can put us right here by on the German speaking side of the country. Graben means ditch or boundary, and across Switzerland, because of the different languages that are used across the country, this boundary is well identified. And here on this extract from a map in Bern canton of Bern, you can see the different languages. You've got the French language used on the left-hand side, and the German-based language used on the right-hand side. So that's just an example of the cultural impact. Not dissimilar, I don't think, to the Landslides line, which I think goes across Pembrokeshire, where you've got Welsh and English place names evidenced in the same way. So moving on to something, again, a little bit different. This is just an example of some of the Söhnen or Bis. This is from Valais, Canton Valais, where they are very significant in their numbers. And these are water courses that bring water down from alpine streams, which are descending from the higher land down to the valley bottom, in this case the Rhone, at quite a gradient, and water is extracted at various points and is then brought pretty much along the what I think I would describe as the same level as the contours. There are 3 on this example, which I'm afraid I can't point out, but there's one running along where it says Witterumwald, just below that, and then you'll see a road, and then there's again a stream that you can just make out above 1040 and a below 1040. So they run along the hillside in parallel water courses, very well maintained and still used to this day. Definitely well worth a walk if you're ever in the area, but boy, do you need a head for heights, because some of them are extraordinarily exposed and quite challenging, and I can say that from personal experience. And lastly, perhaps just to have a look at some examples of the engineering, which of course I think Switzerland is probably world renowned. On the Left-hand side is the Gotthard Railway going up to the tunnel, which was built in 1882. And you'll see there the railway line is now depicted in the new colour form of two red lines. At the top of the extract, there's a spiral where the lower railway goes into the mountainside and comes out higher up. And then at Vassen, where the railway line passes the village 3 times in the course of ascending up towards the tunnel. Running parallel to that is the motorway that was opened in the 1980s to get access to the Gotthard Road Tunnel. The latest piece of work in the area is the opening of the Gotthard Base Tunnel for the railway, which goes underground at Ursfeld, and you can see here the way that the old railway merges in with the new, with a quite significant flyover, and then the tunnel itself shown on the map by parallel dotted lines. This tunnel is the longest railway tunnel in the world at just over 35 miles and was opened in 2016, and a major investment by the Swiss to reduce road transport north to south and to ensure a much quicker route for vehicles to be taken by rail, amongst other things. There are passenger trains using it. In fact, the number of trains over the old route is now significantly reduced. Okay, I think just lastly to say that if you're interested in all this, then I would recommend visiting the Swiss Topo website. They've got a fantastic amount of material there. If you look under the Journey Through Time section, that gives you all the historic material. You can even play it in a video format. So if you wanted to see the landslide at Randa occur in front of your eyes, then you can see the mapping change to show that. And all the latest Swiss Topo mapping is now available free digitally online. So you can start at that point. And I'd recommend that. So that was really going to be, I think, enough from me. I've probably gone on a little bit longer than I thought I would. But Jerry, do you want to perhaps pick up?
Well, let me thank you, first of all, for an intriguing and very, very in-depth study of Swiss topo mapping. I would like just to say that I have none of that expertise, but I have a lot of maps to show. So hopefully I will go at quite a pace and get through some of them. I might skip one or two because Bill, for all I know, may be a lot more interesting than what I've got. But I wanted to say particularly, I don't know if you've got sound, have you, Peter Barber? Say hello, Peter.
Hello, I have got sound, yeah.
Are you in Switzerland at the moment?
I am indeed.
Oh,
congratulations on your grandchild.
Thank you.
Peter did say one point in our email exchange that for constitutional reasons, Landes topo mapping is restricted to nothing more detailed than 1 to 25,000.
Well, I've now heard it's been altered a bit. I mean, to 1 to 10,000. But until recently, it was a point of cantonal pride.
And they were of variable qualities.
They were. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And did you have anything you wanted to talk to us about tonight, Peter? Because we haven't had the opportunity to speak.
Not really about the modern mapping, no. It's, you know, other than to say that before Swiss Topo came along, well, the reputation of Swiss maps wasn't all that brilliant.
Well, I've been a fan of it ever since you had that exhibition in London. So,
yeah.
Years ago, it was excellent stuff, and I've been hooked on it. And I was delighted to find that I had quite a few various Swiss. So, I'm going to say thank you for that, Peter. Thank you, Gavin, again. I'm going to, if you would kindly mute, someone's got background music or something. If you could mute, that would be good. Thank you, Peter. And Bill, if you get restless, tell me to stop. I'm just going to take back I'm not sure if I can share screen as well at the same time. Let me just check that in a minute. I'll just start my own background. My own sharing facility. My machine, of course, instantly goes slow. Do forgive me, folks. Won't be long. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I hope I'm getting there. I must invest in a new, faster computer. It seems to have gone on a go slow. Gavin has asked me to speak specifically on the signs, the conventional signs leaflets, of which I have several examples, and some index maps as well, which we'll take a very quick look at. And then we'll, as Gavin said, look at glaciers with some enlargements, and we'll look at some famous mountains there. And I can't call up my pictures. I'm sorry about this. Just a minute. And then if there's time on top of all of that, I have a few Swiss Topo, some maps using Swiss Topo data, but published by other people. And while I'm busking it, I'm furiously trying to open the right.
Jerry, could I come in just briefly?
Please carry on, Peter.
No, it's just to.
What's happened?
Peter has gone on to mute, so I don't know whether he's muted himself by accident or whether you have muted him, Jerry.
I haven't muted him, but I seem to have lost everything myself.
No, what I was going to say is simply that in Switzerland, Dufour is as well known as a political figure as a mapping figure, because he was.
You're cutting out a lot, Peter, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, that's trying in an. Is it better here?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, what I was going to say was that in Switzerland, General Dufour is better known as a political figure than as a mapper, because he was in command of the Swiss Federal Forces in 1847 during the Religious Civil War.
Right.
You didn't hear that?
I didn't. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's have another chat later on. I finally got this system to work for me, and here we go with a romp through some Swiss Topo mapping, which I hope everyone finds of interest. I mentioned there were conventional science leaflets. As you can see, they're in, I don't know about Romansh, but they're certainly in English, French, and German. We're going to take a closer look at the German one in a minute. But I want to, first of all, I can rearrange this screen better. I'm sorry about this, folks. Here we go. This is so you can have a quick look at the contents of it. Here we have roads, railways, very detailed. And if I can successfully zoom in without wrecking the thing, you will see glaciers at the bottom of the picture. These are the three different scales. If I go to the top, it goes 25, 50, 100,000. And you can see the incredible detail that we're going to see more of later. but all of these are laid out in these conventional signs leaflets. Here's individual symbols, hydrography, trig points, and the lettering, which was still at the time of this leaflet, which was about year 2000, I think. 2001 this is taken from, and the German one we're going to look at in a minute was 1997, but a wealth of data there. On the reverse, here are photographic indications of what we're talking about. They sell the terrestrial photographs on the left. I don't know if you can see my big cursor. I tried to make it bigger for this, but I'm not sure it's working. And then we have digital ortho photos, otherwise known as Swiss image or Swiss image. Here we have graphic examples of the same part of the world at the various scales, 25, 50, and little 100,000 over there. Moving on, I wanted to look at the German one in particular because I haven't got the English equivalent, but you can see here that you have a photographic explanation of the legend. Whoops, sorry. Starting about. This is 5 classes of roads. I told you this is going to be a romp. We're going to move on. By class 5, of course, you're looking at off-roading and tracks. On the left there, you have footpaths, bridges. I like the gedeckte Brücke, very Swiss feature. I seem to remember walking over one in Lucerne. And here we have, I'm not sure what this is, Steg and Passerelle, I suppose they're footbridges, and railways, narrow gauge, cable, and so on. So a very full photographic legend. Here's a glacier in the top left-hand corner. We'll see it better in a moment. Boundary stones and the trig point. Here's the Swiss equivalent of our trig pillar. And finally, rivers, pipelines, electrical lines, and water towers. There's another edition of it from earlier on, very much smaller and quite cute. A quick look at the index maps now. This is the first fold of it's a triple A4 sized thing, so it's a bit difficult to show, but there you have 50,000 sheets in green, and the composites or Zusammensetzungen, or assemblage, the composite sheets, in other words, 100,000, and the combined sheet, which is getting a bit hard to read. There you have all the scales and numbers on them, and 25,000 with other composite sheets as well. And here is the cover, which just for good measure has the skiing maps and the the other way around, the walking maps at the top and the skiing maps sheets at the bottom, and this cover. So that's very full. There's 3 different editions of it, just to show you. I think this was 83, the little one, and then it went big around 2000. So there we have it. There's one here which is prettier, but it's rather challenging to read. If I zoom in on that, I don't think you'll be any the wiser. Very difficult to read for an index map, but pretty to look at. And the reverse of this, if I show you quickly, has a lot of information on the different map series. So it's it indulges us mappies quite a lot. Now, that's 2 of my 4 topics covered already. I told you this was going to be a romp. I'm just going to dart about here because these have come out of my camera in the wrong order. This, as you'll see, is the sheet labeled Jungfrau. This is 50,000 sheet. I'll just zoom in generally, and then we'll go to a blow up. But look at that detail. I think it's beautiful. Here's the Jungfrau. I think I can get you a better image of that by going back to this one. Ah, this is actually, this is another part of it, but it's a good view of a glacier. The Große Aletschwirn. Peter, feel free to correct me. But there's the Jungfrau right in the top of my extract. How the devil, before satellite mapping, they managed to get such detail in, I do not know. Here's the Matterhorn sheet. If I zoom in on that, you can just see how many lines there are in this. I'm not sure how to interpret all of them, but it's still beautiful to look at. Here's one of the mountain itself. Hill shading, contours, beautiful. Is that Pick Tyndall? I don't know who Tyndall was. Does anyone want to volunteer? Sounds a very English name. And then we did climb a lot of their mountains without being asked. Romping on, here's the Matterhorn sheet. These are at 25 thou, I should have said. The Matterhorn and Zermatt coming up. And this is Breithorn on the Zermatt sheet. I'm sorry, it keeps jumping when I zoom in, which is very annoying. But I hope you're getting some pleasure out of seeing these beautiful glacier depictions. Here's the top of the Zermatt sheet. You were talking about annotations. Several of these sheets, Gavin, have got these tiny, tiny cartographer's hand notes around the edge, and I haven't interpreted many of them, but
I think they're rather nice.
Yes, they add value to it. I think I used to clean up all the second-hand maps I bought, and I wish I hadn't, because they all mean something. If only. Oh, there's your Dufour-Spitze.
Yes. Well, bearing in mind what we've just heard, it is possible that he, if he took such a significant role in the wars at the time, that the country possibly honoured his role in that, maybe more than the mapping. But perhaps there's a question there to come back.
This is, of course, as you said, right on the Italian border. And there's a tiny little imprint, if I remember rightly, at the bottom, which says that any conventional signs or notations will be in the style of that country, not of Switzerland, which I thought was intriguing. So you're meant to know how to interpret those. That's the main one. If I've got time, please, Gavin, can I go on? Have I got time?
Well, have you got one more, and then we can go to Bill?
I've just got a few to show you very quickly. I will skip over some of them, and if I can well, I tell you what, let me hand over now to Bill.
Okay.
I will prepare this the next batch rather better than I did that time, because it's a long-winded process on this machine. I've given up trying to use PowerPoint on it, so I'm having to call up individual photo files.
Okay.
I
Well,
will do that. There's about half a dozen different, no less, a handful anyway of maps using Swiss Topo data and published by other people, which I'd like to show because some of them go back to the 20s and 30s.
okay. Well, if I share Bill's material? Bill, are you with him?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can.
So,
Right, I've just unmuted.
you better tell me when you want to move on to the next image. So if I
Yeah,
go to the first one.
changing slide or something. I can't tap, can I?
No.
Right, shall I start?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. Okay. Years ago, when I was in the paying visits to the old map library in the old British Museum, I found on their shelves there a copy, all in German, of this book, Edward Imhoff and Relief. And I came home and raving about it, and then magically, we just got the internet then. This appeared on my birthday from my son and my wife, and it's an American publication, and it goes through chapter after chapter of various ways of depicting relief, contouring, hachering in various styles, the hachering, and of course shaded relief, the one that the Swiss maps are famous for. So if you'd like to change, next slide. Right, at the back of the book, there's about a dozen of these inserts, and this is a sample. I've got it. It's all in English, fortunately, or American English maybe, where Imhoff has done some samples, and this is for a school map on 100,000. How the relief is done with the various colours, and then the line work and rock work and the contours are added on sort of the final map. You can see the reds, but okay. I'll say it won't be that fast, won't be that long. Another sample page of how the various colours were used in the printing of the maps. It's a fascinating book to get stuck into. If you like relief, and I do like relief on maps, pretty maps. I like to, there are various pretty maps. And I suppose the nearest thing the Ordnance Survey have ever done on some of this stuff could be the Isle of Skye half-inch map with fifth relief. And all right, there are the tourist maps with relief, but nowhere near as what we used to get in the early days of Ordnance Survey, and of course with the Swiss. Okay, next. Right, this I found out going online what you could get from the Swiss topographical mapping was this particular map, courtesy of my wife holding it up. I said, I need a bit of scale to show how lovely large it is. It's the original artwork was, of course, all hand drawn by Edward Imhoff himself. Okay, next slide. It's a flatter version of the map. So there's no sort of line work on it, no roads, rails. It's just an ultra pretty map. And it's a gorgeous map to look at. In the middle, you can see the two lakes of Lake Thun and Lake Brienz, and below them are just see the whitish areas of the Bernese Oberland, which we've just seen, the Jungfrau and the Alex Glacier, which is just seen on Jerry's. Lake Zurich up a bit further up, but yeah, I rave over this map. Next slide, please. This is a zoom in on as I say, the Bernese Oberland area, Lake Thun up on the left, Lake Brienz, and how can I say, if you go over the mountain below Lake Brienne's, the Brownie area, I can't remember, the Follhorn, I think, down into the valley there, that's where Grindelwald is situated, where most of my holidays in Switzerland have been, to Grindelwald, with the massive walls towering above you, the Wetterhorn and the Eiger North Wall. And then going off down below centre, curving round, is the Aletsch Glacier and the Rhone Valley cutting across bottom right-hand corner. Okay, next. I think we go into a bit more detail. This is the Grindelwald Valley with the Eiger and the Wetterhorn and Lake Brienne's just above it at the top end. All this work is all, it must have, I don't know how long it would have taken him to do it, but if he's doing this and all his other maps as well, or maybe he's got his minions doing his hill shading, if he's produced manuals telling everyone how to do it or how they should do it, how you should do it and doing it is two different things. I've spent quite a bit of time shading my maps when I used to go walking in North Wales. I've got some of my provisional 2.5-inch maps, all beautifully hill shaded. And I used to take that out. Fortunately, the paint never ran in the rain, so it was okay. Okay, next slide, please. The same map sample of Lake Lucerne. The light coming from the northwest again, of course. No detail, lovely, just the plain topography there. Now, is that my last one, Gavin, or have you given me more?
I've put on all your other maps as well.
All right, I'll sweep through them because they're just pretties. Right, tourist maps. I found some of these pretty maps, these tourist maps are phenomenal. You know, well, I would say absolutely works of art. Tamer area, the Bernese Oberland, Grindelwald area. Okay. Next. And another one, slightly smaller scale, but colours are amazing. Next one, I think if we zoom in on the Grindelwald area, yeah, there's the glaciers coming down into the Grindelwald Valley, and the colours there.
It's good, isn't it?
A pretty map. I'm afraid most of mine are pretty maps like this sort of thing. Okay, next map is right. It's obviously the Lake Lucerne map. All these tourist maps, very cheap to buy. Again, a pretty map. Next one. I'm zooming through these because there is a detail of that map. I think you don't need me to speak about it. You can see for yourselves what it's like. I'm glad I've got a nice big screen on my computer. I can see these. This is nice. Okay, now we do the last two. You're on about school maps and atlases. This is pick this one up in Lucerne of a school map with various examples of scales of the national mapping, but it's the map on the reverse. Now this is the next. It gets me. Okay, next, the last slide. The light is coming from the south. This sort of goes against all the rules we're told of hill shading, but they've, for some reason, whether it's because of it's a school map, I don't know, but other school maps must be conventional, what I call shaded relief. But this is, it's very strange seeing this, like, you know, this way of this light coming from the south, which is all right. People say, yeah, but light always comes from the south. Maybe, but it does funny things for your eyes. So I don't know why the school authorities in Lucerne chose this particular sort of way of depicting the relief. Okay, that's done.
Okay, is that all, Bill?
Yes, that is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you then, Jerry, if you've got...
Okay, I just like, I'm glad I asked Bill to go first because he's got the same taste as I have with one or two of those. So I shall have to whiz over some of mine. I wanted to say that we've had some interesting messages in chat, and thank you everyone who's contributed in that. Let me just spread the word with some of these. There's comparisons being drawn between Swiss Topo and OS, who put the legend on every sheet, but then of course they also have symbol sheets as well. Thank you, Davids, for that. And Michiel Rademakers has said the little blue stripes on the glacier maps, I presume, are probably artists' impressions of ice cleavages. And David Fairbairn has chipped in and said all the rock drawing, glacier sketching, scree rendering has been done to date by topographers employed by Swiss Topo. They interpret aerial photography and sketching in the field. Imhoff was a master of this, and incorporate their artistic impressions on the maps. Current attempts are being made to automate such terrain representation, not successfully, in my view, says David Fairbairn. And David Forrest adds that he used several of the Imhoff images in his lecture on relief representation to MSc students just 2 weeks ago. So there we are. Great minds think alike. Let me say thank you for all those chat remarks. I've now got, I think I'm able to show you this if I share my screen. This is one very much like some of Bill's. Swiss, it wasn't called Swiss Topo then, was it? My German leaves me because I need it, but it was the state mapping body. And this is a tourist map of Kandersteg and surrounds, where I went as a kid and fell in love with. But this map goes right back to 1930. And if I zoom in a bit, you will see there the town of Kandersteg. I can zoom in a bit more, I think, on that. And you can see where the railway disappears into the, is it the Simplon Tunnel, railwayman? That carries on south from there.
Lochenberg.
There's the Lurchberg Tunnel.
Lurchberg, yes, thank you very much.
Replaced, oh well, there's another one, a new one as well. Well now.
I won't dwell on these, just to rattle through them. There's a glacier on this same map. Beautiful drawing. Rather nice colouring, I think. I'm not sure quite how green those mountains really were, but nice to look at. There's the cover of it. Charming in itself, complete with a rather English sounding name written on this one. Here's another one. Wengen und Jungfrau Gebiet is 25,000. That last one, by the way, was at 30,000 scale. This is 25,000. Let's look at this. Of the Eiger, and what else is on this map? There's some red, but I don't think that's railways.
They look like possibly, no, I was going to say footpaths, but they're not.
I think they're footpaths, yes. I've got a lovely one which Ian Byrne would love, of the most crazy examples of a zigzag road to die for. I must show it to you before we pack up. But I want to race on. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah, lovely depiction. Love it. And here's the Jungfrau off the same map.
Did you want to put that paella into cook? Yeah.
Only if you share your paella. There's the one that Bill showed. So moving on, I went to Beck and Reed on Lake Lucerne as a kid as well, and I think this is the cover of that same map, published by the Lake Lucerne Navigation Company in English. There are the different names, the very different names that are used in Switzerland for Lake Lucerne. Here are three maps at random using modern or more modern Swiss topo mapping. The one on the left is published by the Obwaldner Wanderwege for the footpaths. And this one in the middle is the Swiss Hiking Federation, and this is Zermatt Tourism. And here is an example of the latter one, complete with cable cars on these blue lines here and ski lifts. A lot of data you just don't see so often in this country. This is the Zermatt one, Zermatt Tourism, which is effectively the Swiss Topo sheet, but with the footpaths added. There's Zermatt there. I think I've got a blow up of part of that. No, that is your lot. That is your lot. I won't rabbit on because you've heard it all, and thank you so much to everyone who's contributed. Does anyone want to say anything, raise anything, add anything to our knowledge?
I was going to comment on, Gary, looking at some of the stuff you were showing, the various ways or the various languages that are or are not shown. Well, there were conventional signs in, you showed in English, French and German versions. I assume they were Italian and probably, is it Romansh? Separate one. The index map was in German, French and Italian. One of the others was only French and German.
Yeah, there's probably gaps in my collecting ability. One of my primary sources in later life was paying an annual business visit to the World Travel Market, which was handily in London. And some countries are very profligate with their maps. I used to come back with aching arms and bags on bags and bags of maps, and it would last me months to sort them out. So whether I picked the right ones up or not was entirely random. But,
yeah,
that's where most of mine came from. But I did acquire a load of Swiss Topo 25 and 50 thou sheets. And I honestly can't remember where. To my shame, I didn't annotate my index of where I acquired them. But some kindly library, perhaps it was RGS or Bodleian, chucking out their duplicates.
And Gavin, I think, was that first national map you showed just had the conventional signs labelled in German. Whereas...
Yes, I think that's because that map is in the German-speaking part.
Yeah.
A similar vintage map for the French part has got these signs in French. I don't think at that stage Romansh was an official language. And equally in the Italian part, the annotations, if you like, around the map are all in Italian. So depending which part of the country you're in, a different map cover or language on the map cover varied as well.
Yeah, and I would almost expect, I don't know, perhaps that's why they went for a separate set of conventional signs. But you had the one for your language, whichever map you had.
Didn't make for ease though if you were an Italian using a German speaking part map if you weren't fluent.
Well, I imagine, with few exceptions, place names, it were in the local language, whatever that was. And I think I'm trying to think which railway junction it is. Is it Biel or something? It's unusual in that it's always quoted in French and German.
Perhaps it's near the Rosti.
Can I come in here? I'm actually speaking from Biel/Bien, and it is absolutely bilingual.
Yeah.
There we are.
Well, there speaks a native.
Well, not quite.
Semi-native. So thank you, Peter. Thank you. Is the other Peter waving? Is that Peter Lush?
Yes, hello, Jerry. Hello, others. Can I just ask, I'm fascinated that all these fascinating talks have referred to school maps. And I wonder if it's something of special importance to Switzerland that maps were used in school to foster not only national but local identity. Does perhaps the other Peter has a view on this?
Well, the school maps have got a long tradition. I mean, the first school maps that I know of go back to the early 19th century. So, yeah, I mean, the Swiss is very keen on them.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And can I say to Peter Lush, that thank you very much for telling us about that Scottish collection.
Yes. Okay. I've written to the owner, but I didn't have an email address, so it may take some time to get the answer.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you, Rob, for jumping, because I'm packing my bags tomorrow and disappearing for a bit. I've had a message from Ian Byrne, Pick Tyndall, that I picked up on the map of the oh hell, which mountain was that? Matterhorn.
Matterhorn.
Was named in honour of John Tyndall, who made the first ascent, indeed, in July 1863. So we weren't far.
So Wikipedia can tell you anything.
Yeah, I still reach for
Is the peak, as it were, a localization of peak?
Yeah, I think so. It's because I think quite common in French, doesn't it, actually?
What I noticed, this is one for Peter Barber possibly, a lot of mountains seem to be named crap something.
That's Romanche.
It's in the Romanche area in Graben.
Yeah.
And what does it mean?
It doesn't mean what you think it might mean.
What do you mean?
It doesn't answer your question.
It's a difficult mountain.
But you're, on that extract that I showed from Bergun, there's also quite a lot of use of the word God.
Yes.
Yes.
It's a land feature, which I cannot remember at the moment what it means.
The nearest that the Ordnance Survey have got to the Swiss mapping are the Fifth Relief series, where the relief was depicted in a very rich way. But that only continued, as far as I know, for a few years before they evolved towards the non-relief fifth edition. And one of if I remember rightly, the reason given was the expense of producing a map like the Fifth Relief. So the question arises as to, presumably the Swiss national agency has thrown a lot of money into these maps. And would these maps, in the days when you used to buy paper maps, would these be very expensive, Gavin, or are they highly subsidized by the Swiss government?
I don't know the degree of subsidy, but the Interlaken map was 3.75 francs, Swiss francs, in 1959. But I don't know whether that was expensive at the time.
That sounds a lot, but yeah.
It's I think it's probably fair to say that Swiss maps at the moment are relatively expensive in comparison to a UK map.
I think, Gavin, Swiss everything is expensive. Talking to a Swiss business colleague, they're bemoaning the fact that the Swiss franc had made it very difficult for international trading. But listen, that was before lockdown, so who knows?
In 1959, I think the exchange rate was more like 8 francs to the pound. So 3.75 francs for a map was quite good value.
Ben Bob.
Yeah. But, I don't know whether they're subsidized or I couldn't answer that. Somebody did ask a question about the number of sheets on the Siegfried map. And I've just had a look at a couple of copies I've got here, and I suspect that that number quoted, the 600 plus, was correct, because the sheet size was remarkably small. And the ones I'm looking at here, which is not in the south of Switzerland, it's in Valais, sort of central. This is number 473, so still quite a bit of the country to map south of that. So I think that number is correct. And the other point that was raised was in relation to the Dufour map. And the map that I've got here is marked Carte Dufour, but no indication on the face of the map what that red grid or the graticules indicates. So I'm afraid that's an unanswered question at the moment. So I think that's enough from me anyway. Thank you very much anyway for bearing with me.
Can I just
Gavin,
come in with a couple
much.
of points in relation to Jeremy's comments on languages on maps? As many of you know, I collect commercial maps, which tend therefore probably only to be produced in a single edition. So I have in front of me, I just randomly pulled a map out, which I don't know if you can see, but is of, get the right order, Schweiz, Swiss and Switzerland. So I'm afraid the Italians don't get a look in on the face of the map, nor of course do the Romansh, because I was always taught at school Romansh wasn't even written down ever. It's worth noting, if you can just see the detail, get that right, it is actually a carte Whittier, but the company that's publishing it is BP Benzin und Petroleum AG. So there's a certain degree of you have one, we have one there. The legend at the bottom, likewise, I won't show, you probably can't see what I'm doing hanging around, but is again just in German, French and English. But when I turn over to the other side, and there is, just in case we're not sure what they are, a nice convenient set of road signs. There they are. The nice convenient set of road signs are, wait for it, in German, French and Italian. Which, considering that probably everyone knew what the road signs were except for English visitors, because at that stage we would have, that's a 1950s map, we would have still have had the old-fashioned square signs with quite different symbology. It seems quite ironic that English is missed on that particular one. That's not a typical, I do actually have also a rather nice series of shell maps, or individual shell maps of picturesque Switzerland, and there I know they actually had separate versions for English, German and French, but I don't think they did an Italian one again.
Thank you.
My other, well, two other questions. When did the Swiss grid come out that they seem to use? And does the Swiss military use basically Swiss Topo maps? One imagines that they don't have two mapping organizations, so I would imagine they do. And given the fact that one of my comments was that a Swiss civilian was a Swiss soldier in mufti, because of the way everybody did military service for most of their life on and off, that may have influence on it.
I wonder, thank you, Jeremy. I wonder if Peter Barber's got any comments on that. Our man on the ground.
I don't know the answer to that.
That's very straightforward.
Yeah.
You got us all musing now, Jeremy.
Yeah, it's
I think the grid was initially established by Dufour. He undertook the surveys that he did at a 1 to 50,000 scale, but they were published at a 1 to 100,000 scale. And that grid that he established, the principles behind it were and are still used today. So the grid has not changed. If you're interested, there is an article you can download from the Swiss Topo website that explains, I think it uses Filisur in Graubünden as the example. And it explains in some detail the mathematics, if you like, behind the grid. So that information is available to read.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you once again. I'm going to wrap it up now. It's just gone 9 o'clock. It's been a fascinating.
Jerry, can I still ask one question to Gavin, please?
Michiel, please.
Yeah. I saw on the first edition of Gavin showed that there were two different sets of longitude values. One about a full degree apart. Am I right that one of that they were on Greenwich and Faro? Because the hypothetical Faro meridian was used in Germany. I'm interested whether the Swiss used it as well.
How interesting. Anyone know? Sounds very likely.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the bottom of the map now, and
Please, yes.
there are two. It's almost half a degree out.
Who's saying that? Ian?
That's Gavin.
And that was me. I think that's probably the detailed point that maybe looking at that download from the Swiss Topo website might explain the establishment of the latitude and longitude in the grid.
I don't think it can be Faro. Faro is something like 4 degrees west of Greenwich. So I think it might be Paris.
Right.
Or would it be that they had their own datum?
It may well be.
Ooh.
And which is what one would expect.
That's quite possible, given that it was the first attempt to establish a national map for the country that was just coming out of a period of considerable turmoil.
Yeah.
Maybe less likely to want to rely on another country's baseline.
And if
a very, very detailed and interesting thing to research.
Yeah, if you're talking about basically the mid-19th century, I'm not sure at that stage Greenwich was as established as the international datum as it became a bit later.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
But
all right. Anyone else? Any other points, please? If not, let me thank Gavin once again for bringing us together and chairing a fascinating talk. Gavin, thanks. I'm wondering what your next specialist subject is going to be. We'll have to start a Charles Close mastermind contest, I think. But it's been a joy to look at all these lovely Swiss maps again. They're draped over. I don't know if I can show you. Can you see that?
Oh, yes, yes.
I just don't want to put them away. I want to.
Well, it'd be nice to be able to visit the country again soon, hopefully.
Yes, hopefully. Personally, I'm disappearing for a real holiday after tomorrow, but I shall. We haven't got another meeting set for this sort of thing, but if anyone would like to volunteer for that, it would be splendid to have another meeting before too long. And in July, I think we don't have a meeting, but we have a committee, Rob, don't we? And which will be online again, and we have our AGM set, of course, for August the 14th. Everybody, so do join us by Zoom for that. But once again, thank you for your contributions, Peter Barber and Peter Lush and everyone else, and thank you, Bill Batchelor, for your. What are you showing us now, Bill? Oh, it's a 3D map. It's a relief map.
Yeah, Switzerland, from Switzerland.
That takes a bit of packing. These are devils to stow. I don't know about you. I don't know what to do with my relief maps. They're beautiful to look at and take up far too much room, but Switzerland must be a swine. Depends how much you exaggerate the height, of course. Anyway, thank you all very much indeed, especially Gavin, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Jerry.
Cheers.
Bye.
Peter, see you in Highgate sometime.